what is this urgency? What is this time right now?
Yeah. So, you mentioned sleepwalking into a water and food crisis. And so it has been that 20 years. 20 years ago, I've been looking back at a lot of the things, whether we've written or colleagues and friends across the water community have talked about, and it was usually in the frame of risks.
Mhm.
What is the risk? What could happen? If we do this, then this will happen. If we don't do this, then this will happen. What's different today is that those risks are really turning into realities. So risk sounds kind of amorphous, right? So it's something that your insurance agents, will look at for you. How you're insuring your home or your car. What's the risk of something happening, right?
Yeah.
But now they're actually happening. We're seeing, moments. I call them moments of relevancy when
Mhm.
we see ourselves in the picture, um, and that's when we have the pressures of climate change, the pressures of over extraction, even too much water, too much, too little, too polluted, that are affecting our global stability, affecting our supply chains, affecting how companies are investing in um, managing it, whether it's their operations, their risk, or even now more so, their water supplies. And so we're seeing this convergence. And then the reason we're here at the Munich Security Conference is that this is a topic of national security now. How does a nation or a community or a world bring a level of stability in a time of instability? And how do we share this limited resource? And how do we make sure that water doesn't turn into a point of leverage against one another for economic or political or military gain? How do we turn this into a moment where we actually understand that we're on a small planet, limited water supply that we need to share?
Around some of these moments of relevancy, can you kind of share with myself and the audience some of the larger ones maybe we could point to? I feel like be interesting to kind of understand like what are a few of these that are affecting the supply chains that are affecting kind of global stability?
Yeah, I think that, part of it is if you go to how water's being used as leverage, you can start to dive into a lot of great PhD thesis opportunities. But you look at upstream of say India, China, Pakistan.
Uh-huh.
Where's the water come from? Himalayas, right? And so, but we're starting to see shifts in that water supply. We're starting to see less snowpack right now in the American West. We're starting to see less snowpack in Europe. Um, that's a moment of relevancy when, by come summertime, certain parts of the world, or certain parts of the United States, or certain parts of Europe, will likely have less water. And how does that? They may have more water for a certain time, but the water flow is going to go up. It was going to change. How is that going to affect our calculations and our assumptions about our ability to grow food and even generate power? Um, and I can give one example that it was a slow walk to a moment of relevancy that actually led to change. Um, so it was a little less than 10 years ago with the Wilson Center in Washington.
Mhm.
We looked at and convened a group of experts to look at water and energy in China. It's a big question we could ask. Um, in journalism, the joke is, particularly around water in these big stories, to tell the intern, run out the door and go cover water, right? And they run out and they look around, oh, where do I start? I
Yeah.
mean, water is so complicated, right? And so what we did is we convened a group to say, we want to look at water and energy in China. Okay, that's too big to chew. But if we look at and boil it down to a simple question, does China have enough water to mine and process coal at current rates? Now, this falls all around, I think, where we need to be testing ourselves today, because a lot of our assumptions are based on shallow information or outdated context. And so it's a long story, but the short version is we put together a portfolio of funders that were interested in helping us answer that question. And we got unprecedented access to the mines and the mills and statistics bureaus in Inner Mongolia, northern China, which is a belt where a lot of its coal is mined, a lot of China's coal is mined, and a lot of power is generated. And so what we did is we deployed 4 teams across China to look at this nexus, this water energy nexus, and particularly through a lens of that coal-fired power generation and also the coal necessary for those plants, and to test some assumptions. And so back of the napkin, it's pretty easy to say, well, yeah, likely, power plants, fossil fuel power plants, use water to cool themselves, right? Well, these plants were using groundwater to cool themselves. And so they're literally ratcheting the water down, draining the aquifers. I stayed with Inner Mongolian shepherds whose wells had gone dry. This is in the grasslands that you see, picture perfect green. But I have a picture of a young Mongolian shepherd's daughter actually standing on the grasslands, which had turned to sand, and she looks very distraught. Of course, this is her homeland. What we were able to show then is that this was an unsustainable trend. The coal mines were draining the aquifers to process and mine coal. The power plants were pushing that water up into the sky with steam, with their cooling towers. Great. We reported that. We published that in English and Chinese with the Wilson Center. Good for us. We also published this with the World Economic Forum. Good for us. It's nice outreach. Great, provocative. But then we went back to China, back to being kind of a neutral table or convener, partnered with the Wilson Center and others. And we took that story. We took that story of Wu Yun, the shepherd's daughter. We took the story of the coal mines and coal plants back to China, 17 convenings over 2 weeks. It's kind of like Bob Dylan on tour, right?
Yeah.
But maybe a little more understandable. But then what we did is we told a story that was not, it was blame free. This is what's happening. And we partnered with a public affairs firm in Shanghai, which brought their clients to the table. Here's an issue. Here's a risk you might not have been aware of. And then with the U.S. Embassy, they brought in the consulate staff because they identified this as an interest of national security. We did the Yellow River Commission. 1,200 people came to a PowerPoint with nice pictures and lots of stats. We were, okay, that's China. A lot of people will come to these things. But we also did a session with the water minister. And I learned something really important when we're talking about these complex issues and talking about particularly water, because we take water for granted in many cases, for whether it's industrial use, growing food, the whole separate conversation about the valuing of water. And it's also about agency. Whose voice is being heard and whose isn't? Well, here you have the water minister who, in our eyes, is critical, but maybe in the broad-shouldered eyes of an economy, not so much, except we, with the Wilson Center and Circle of Blue, sitting on his shoulder, so to speak, we gave him relevancy and agency. He could talk to the infrastructure minister and say, if you want to fill that canal, you have to talk to me. We could give him standing with the energy minister. If you want to cool the power plant or mine the coal, you can talk to me. And so the long tail of that, we did several scenario sessions, and then also some other kind of impacts, data and other pieces. World Bank came out with a report called Thirsty Energy. Mm-hmm. What happened then is I got a call from the U.S. State Department, and they said, by the way, you might want to know that President Xi has moved water and energy up to a national security issue. So it moved it from a kind of a nice to have and an assumption up to a national security issue.
Wow.
And they changed national policy. They changed their 5-year plan. China publishes a 5-year plan every 5 years, and a direction. And when I went back to visit the shepherds that I'd stayed with, the shepherd's kids took me around and showed me the coal plants that had been torn down. So what we were able to do is be a bit of a butterfly wing, and that in that kind of tsunami, or to mix metaphors, the breeze, the cyclone of what really helped put wind in the sails for China's renewable investments, because renewables nice to have, right? But if you don't have water, you better find another option. So when I went back to Inner Mongolia, I went back 3 more times. They were laying in massive solar fields and massive wind farms. So when we talk about sleepwalking, there wasn't an event, it wasn't an emergency. It was kind of a slow moving, but we put it in a context they can understand. Now all of that is speeding up. We're seeing groundwater supplies diminishing. We're getting closer and closer to a lot of straws running out. So the challenge is now, how do we accelerate this level of